here is the graph of g of x. Sketch the graph of y equals negative g of x. So one thing that I look at here, it's outside. It's going to affect the y. If my y value gets multiplied by a negative 1, so this is my first thing that I'm thinking about. Can you see that that is going down? That's going to be over the x-axis. We would call that a vertical reflection. My y values are multiplied by negative 1. I'm flipping over the x-axis. So I'm writing them down now, but as I'm doing a math question, when I see something, my head starts to trigger all of those things and tell myself all of those pieces of information. Because when I go to graph it, I'm going to use a bunch of these pieces of information. Okay? One, I'm going to multiply my y values by negative 1. So I have the point here, 1 comma, and this is where I want you to put the y coordinate down, and I want to ask questions. Okay, you got your y coordinate down? Okay? It's 1 comma 6. How many people put 1 comma 5 because they saw the 4 and just moved up 1? Okay, there's a couple. How many people put 1 comma 3 because they just counted up 3 and did 1 comma 3? So we have to be careful of our scale sometimes. This one is 1 comma 6. Now if I multiply that by a negative, I'm going to get 1 comma negative 6. Okay, another point here. Okay, this one, 3 comma 2. Again, check if you wrote 3 comma 1. Because you're very tempted on that one just to count one space up. Okay, and then reflected, multiply my y value by negative 1, I get 3 negative 2. So I've used that first strategy, multiplying y's by negative 1. Okay? The other thing I want you to think about in this graph is that when I draw the blue graph and the red graph are going to intersect at only one point. Where is that point, and why is it at that one point? And when I say where is that point, you don't have to give me exact coordinates, but you do have to describe exactly where it is.
Is this a call and response?
Do you have an idea? Sure, go ahead.
At 0, right? On x equals 0 and y equals slightly. Wait, no. Like right to the left of the y.
Yeah, okay. So you're going to get some help from over here, because he's going to use the word that's you're trying to describe, the x-intercept. Yeah. Because you want this point right here, because the y coordinate would be 0. We don't know what the x coordinate is. That's why I said you didn't need to say exactly what the coordinate was, but I wanted you to describe it exactly, which using the word x-intercept described it exactly. And why does that point not change? What happens when you multiply 0 by negative 1? Still going to be 0. Okay, so that is an important point as well. And now I'm going to use the idea of the vertical reflection and over the x-axis, because I can kind of visualize, okay, I'm going to flip this bottom part up, and then I'm going to flip this part, it's got to go through those points, down. Put arrowheads on the end of my graph to show that it goes up and down forever. Good. Now, domain and range on this one, because it says state the domain and range for each function. It's not very exciting because it keeps going up forever and down forever, to the left forever and to the right forever. I'm going to use set notation. We can say the domain is everything, the range is everything. And then if you flip it, domain is still everything. The range range is still everything.
Can we switch the way that we write domain and range halfway through? Like when we write
If you're writing it, you get to choose whatever. You can't, but depends what you mean by switch halfway through. Okay?
we write domain and
You can't do that. Wait a minute. That switching halfway through is not okay. But if you did this last one, that's fine. Now, generally, some general rules that won't lose marks, but if the question had the domain in set notation, because you had some questions that said, hey, the domain went from -1 to 10, and you moved it down 9 units. Since it was in set notation, it's sort of proper to answer in set notation. But it wouldn't be wrong if you did it the other way. If the question was in interval notation, you would stay in interval notation. Yes? The y-intercept doesn't matter because it, like, wherever it is, and Mike, like, that would get flipped down, right? So it should be right here. My graph is a little bit off just by sketching, but as long as these are key points because they're maximums and minimums, and this is a key point, the rest is going to be slightly off just by your drawing, but they're not going to deduct you for that. Unless the question said, make sure you label your y-intercept. Then it would become important. Okay, questions for this one? 4, 5, 6, 10, and 11.